Welcome to the Living the International Life podcast, where we discuss all topics from studying, working, and living abroad, and even language learning. And I'm your host, Jazz Cole, president and founder of Multilingual and Philanthropic Incorporated. Let's dive right in. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Living the International Life podcast, where we talk about all things relating to studying, working, or living abroad. And in this episode, we have Shea Jordan, aka Day with Shay on YouTube, all about learning Italian. And she's currently studying Italian and living in Bologna as of right now. So thank you so much, Shay, for your time and for being here and sharing all that you have to share.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so happy to be here and talk with you about all this fun stuff, studying Italian, living in Italy.
So I originally found you because I was watching your YouTube videos a while back. There was one in particular, it was learning Italian in a month. And what drew me to that is that I felt like, I feel like there's always some type of connection like people make when they're trying to learn a language seriously. And so I kind of want to know a little bit more about your background, where you kind of started with before you created that video, in terms of just what drew you to Italian specifically.
Yeah, so I have talked about this a little bit on my channel, but on my mom's side of the family, I have like Italian heritage. And so when I was younger, we visited Italy, and I always have been really fascinated with Italian like history. And even in high school, I had the option to study Spanish, French, or Latin. And I studied Latin because I was like, well, this seems the closest to Italian as I can get. I don't know. I just always had this fascination with the language and the culture, and visiting Italy. I mean, it's beautiful. So when I studied abroad in university, I could go to London or Rome, but I knew right away that I wanted to go to Rome. And so when I took the program there, which was in English, I just loved Rome so much. And I had started to learn a little bit of Italian there, but it wasn't serious because, I was with other American students who were only speaking English. And in Rome, it's such a touristic city that so many people speak English. It's not necessary really to have like a fluent level of Italian being there. But I think that really helped me realize how badly I wanted to actually live in Italy. But if I wanted to live there, I wanted to be able to speak the language. So when I finished college and I had more time to study, because I did not have a job right out of college, I started trying to look at Italian. Yeah, it's very difficult. A lot of people think, oh, I have to call it, but no, it's not always like that. So at first, I made this video to just kind of challenge myself to see how much I could learn. It was also inspired by another creator that I really like. His name is Nathaniel Drew, and he did a similar challenge. So it kind of helped like kickstart my studying, I would say. But after I did that challenge, I realized, okay, I actually really enjoy this, and this is something that I can see myself doing long term. And then it just kind of grew from there.
Okay. Because I also remember, I think a while back, I think with some of your earlier videos, you did some vlogs in Rome. And so I'm kind of curious as to when you came back, what were your biggest takeaways that kind of, I feel like in a way, kind of coming back, full circle, what kind of do you feel like was what you took away from that experience?
From when I studied abroad in Rome.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was kind of interesting because when I compare how I feel now living in Italy to then, I definitely still felt like a tourist because, I knew my time was limited there, and I was there, like I said, just surrounded by a bunch of other English speakers. Whereas now I feel like I'm really integrated into the community here, and I feel like, okay, this could really be my home now because I can connect with people on a different level now that I'm able to speak their language. But I think it was interesting because I don't know that I would have been able to make this jump to actually move here without having that experience in Rome, because it gave me the interest and like the passion, but also made me, at the end of the 4 or 5 months of studying abroad, like I didn't want to go back to the US. I wanted to stay in Italy longer. Whereas a lot of people by the end of that program, they were like, no, I'm done. I miss the US. I want to go back, which I understand. But for me, I was like, no, there's still so much more of Italy I want to experience and see. And so I feel like, honestly, when I got back to the US, I knew it was kind of just like a matter of time until I figured out how to go back to Italy.
Yeah, I feel like I kind of had a similar experience when I was studying in France. The difference was that for me, I had been studying French since like I was like 10. I mean, even before I could take my first French class, I was literally looking up words on Google Translate because I really wanted to learn it so bad. And I remember I was the only student who could speak fluent French. And so even though like my time, because kind of like your time was limited, but it's like when you know the language and it feels like after like so long, you start getting used to it. And then like right when you're getting really, really good at it, you have to leave. And it's like, oh, that kind of stunned my growth because I was just, I was just starting to really understand, because the way you learn it is sometimes different than like when you actually go there and you're like, I have no idea what anyone's saying.
Yeah. No, that's very true. Because I had been studying for, I guess, like a few years before I got to Italy. And when I got there, it really was such a shock because it's not what you expect. I mean, Italians, everyone has different accents. There's different dialects. Sometimes people use different words in the north versus the south. And so when you're actually like in the real world trying to use the language, it's so different than the textbooks or the audiobooks or whatever, how you hear people pronouncing words very clearly, very slowly. It's really like a wake-up call. And it made me feel like, what am I doing? Did I make the right decision?
Yeah. I mean, because even like when I feel like one of the things that is like a really big component in terms of making or break your experience is like building community. And even like now, I wonder, how do you feel like you've been able to build community? Because I've heard people have gotten like homesick. I can't talk to anybody because I don't know the language. And then on top of that, it's just, they're kind of isolated. So how do you really build community in a way where it feels comfortable living there?
Yeah. That is something, like you said, that's so important, to actually feeling comfortable in a new place. Because if you don't have those friends or those connections, it makes it so much harder. It actually was quite a struggle in the beginning when I first got here. It took a lot longer than I thought to be able to make those kinds of connections that made me feel more at home. Because I met a lot of people through school. So, I mean, it is really good if you have some sort of program that you're attending. The only thing is that the way my school is set up is not everyone is attending the course as long as I am. There were a lot of people who only came for a few weeks or maybe a few months. So in the beginning, I had some friends there who had been were at school for maybe 4 or 5 months with me, but I've been here for over a year now. So I've seen a lot of people come and go. And while it was really exciting to meet a lot of people in the beginning, I realized after a certain point, okay, I want to be here for a while. Like I need to make connections with people who will also be here just as long as me, because I can't keep having people, I can't keep getting close to people and then having them leave. It's very, very difficult. I feel very lucky because I do have my social media presence. So I had some people reach out to me who lived in Bologna, like a lot of Italian students who reached out to meet with me and like practice Italian or do some sort of language exchange. So that was definitely really helpful. I think you're frozen. Or maybe
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay.
I'm still here. It's just my video.
Okay. Anyways, yeah, so I've actually utilized social media a lot through like either the people who I met at school, maybe they were attending the university here as well and they connected me with people, or I have even posted videos on like TikTok or other social media basically introducing myself, saying that I'm here learning Italian and I want to meet people. And actually I've met some of my really good Italian friends that way. So social media can be used in that way. And of course, like, you'll meet some people who maybe you don't click with, but my friends who are Italians and live here and I can actually like build a friendship with them, I've met through social media, which has been really fantastic.
Okay. Yeah, well, that's really cool though, because I know that like sometimes for me it's like common interest. Because I know like when I was in Paris, one of the things I did like on a free time was I went to a church, because that's something that I normally do on a Sunday. And I'm like, well, that's the easiest place to find anyone who has the same faith. There's something in common. So I don't know, because someone was telling me like, she actually went to international school because her dad traveled all over the place. And so she was saying that like one of the ways that she made friends in all these new places was just finding activities, because she loved to rock climb. And so she was able to find like places where she could do that. Yeah. And I remember earlier you were talking about like some of your experiences with finding a place to live. And I know sometimes that can be a part that can struggle like with a struggle with visa. Because I know someone from Toronto who was like, my whole visa is held up because I don't have a place to stay. So I'm wondering like in terms of that, like what was your experience like with that, and kind of especially if someone else is struggling with the same thing, what would you share, or what would you want someone to know if they were struggling with the same thing? Like if you could look at it from like in a retrospective point of view.
Yeah. I mean, I think it definitely depends on where you're going. Like everyone's rules and bureaucracy are different. I would say if I've learned anything about Italy and Italian bureaucracy is that you can definitely fake it till you make it. I'll just say like I have really tried to follow the rules, but there are a lot of ways that you can kind of get around certain requirements, especially because it just doesn't make sense. You shouldn't have to find an apartment of where you're going to live in a country like for a 6-month visa or a year visa when you've never seen the place. Like to me, it's just a very strange rule to have to like have some sort of apartment set up that you haven't seen or whatever. What I ended up doing was I did book an Airbnb originally for the 6 months because I was only going to do 6 months, and then I ended up staying longer. I found an Airbnb, and a few people told me this, which is technically not something you should do, but you can, once you get your visa, cancel the Airbnb, and that way you have time to go find like your actual long-term apartment once you get there. Technically, I probably shouldn't be giving this sort of advice, but I think also some people have said that they have just had like an Airbnb or some sort of hotel or something that they've shown for, I don't know, the first few weeks. And sometimes it's accepted, but it also depends on the consulate. Like it's very frustrating because rules differ from every consulate or every country or every program. But if anything, I would just say, I was so worried about every little detail. I was so worried that something would mess up my visa, that it would get rejected, it would get denied for some tiny reason. And I've had so many scares and issues with like my permits to stay here and all this other things. But in the end, it always works out. Like I stressed myself out so much for various things. And in the end, you can always usually find a way to correct something or fix something. I mean, I know there are people who, unfortunately, their visas do get denied for certain reasons, and then they really can't, like, they don't give them any other option to try to fix it. But usually, at least in my experience with Italy, they're pretty lenient on certain things. That's just speaking for Italy. I don't know about other programs in other countries.
Okay. Yeah. So, because I know like with visas, they can be tricky. Because I know like since, someone coming from the United States, I know that we're part of like one of those like 5 or 6 countries where you can enter and you don't have to have a visa prior to. Because I remember when I was an au pair, that's what I did. And it was just a matter of like, you just go to the foreigner's office and get a permit to stay there. And I remember when I came back and like, they scanned my passport, they're like, well, how long have you been here? And I had to show my papers to say, yes, I was authorized to stay here longer than that 3-month period because I had documentation saying I had a residence permit. But I think, especially if you're not coming from there, it makes sense that like a lot of times, I think one of my au pair family, she was saying that they originally had someone else in mind, and she was coming from, I think Zimbabwe, but her visa got denied because her German wasn't enough. So that's also a component depending on where you're coming from. It's like you have to have like a minimum A1, but I was really paranoid about that. So I actually did the A2 and the B1 course. So I had a certificate for it. So I was like, I want to be like, this is the minimum, but I want to be above in case they ask me like anything or if I have to read things, you know. So
yeah, that was actually also a requirement that I was unaware of, and they don't really make it super advertised, I guess, for Italian. If you are attending, if you do want to get a visa for a language program specifically in Italy, you have to have at least an A2 level for most consulates, but there are some consulates like Los Angeles that are way more particular. And they require at least a B1 level, which a lot of people reach out to me because they want to do something similar. And then I tell them that, and then they're like, okay, but I haven't started studying yet. And then I'm like, I'm sorry, but if you're in, you know, like you need to have, they won't just give a visa to a complete beginner, which is sad, but I guess they have their reasons for it. But it's something that I feel like isn't super well known for people who want to go study a language somewhere.
Yeah, because I feel like in certain cases, like when, because I know studying abroad is a lot different than vacationing abroad. So it's kind of like, you know, you're there for a particular purpose and it's like, oh, it'll be great. I'm going to study and I'm going to do this. But they don't realize that, like, let's say if you're actually, like, I think there was someone that I knew who was going to high school in Germany. And it was like she ended up coming back because she just had the hardest time understanding the teaching material. Like they were teaching like subjects. Like she's like, I was failing every class because I didn't understand what they were teaching me. So I feel like a lot of times, and I always even think about how teachers in school, like when they teach certain classes, how are we preparing them for life abroad? If, you know, they're like, especially because I encourage people to study abroad, but part of it is just having the proper preparation, because you're going to be in an environment where it's not like, I'm just going to go see the Eiffel Tower. I'm just going to go see whatever. It's like, I'm actually living a life here just like anybody else. So,
yeah.
So, but I also want to know, like, in what ways do you feel like your language learning experience changed when you were learning on your own versus being taught in the school that you were going to?
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely changed tremendously. Like it was very interesting to see. I mean, obviously I knew I would progress a lot quicker attending a program where I was, you know, in school for 4 hours every day and also living in the country. So constantly being exposed to Italian 24/7, basically. I really liked it because I really enjoy structure. And while I was making my own like study plans, it was really nice to be able to go into a school every day and be like, okay, here are 4 hours that I'm dedicating to studying. It's not like I'm at home and if I get distracted, whatever, it's fine. You know, you really have to be like tuned in, because also my teachers were speaking only in Italian from day one. So the immersion as well was really helpful. I think it was also good because, you know, I finally had a group of students, a class that I could actually talk with. We have little coffee breaks and we continue to have conversations in Italian. So having the conversation aspect was really helpful because obviously it's something I didn't really have when I was studying by myself. I used italki to do lessons with a tutor, but I probably didn't do it as much as I should have. So my speaking, when I did arrive in Italy, was definitely, the speaking level was very low, even though I could understand a decent amount. But I also just really liked having a teacher to really go through grammar with me, because I also realized there were a lot of holes and like gaps in my grammar, because maybe, you know, when you study by yourself, sometimes you avoid certain topics. If you're like, this is really difficult, whatever, I'll just move on to the next thing. Or it's very easy to just kind of skip over some things. So it helped me identify some gaps, some things I needed to work on, or things that I just maybe, I don't know, I didn't come across in my resources or my textbooks. So those are just like the different things that I realized being in class versus self-studying.
Okay. Yeah, because I remember my ex-boyfriend was actually from Germany, and I remember like if I didn't know how to say something, I would just either say it like certain words in English, and then he would just kind of go in and be like, that actually means this. So it was helpful. Yeah, but he always would say like, just so you know, I understand what you're saying, but your sentence structure and your grammar suck. Like, and Germans are very honest. Like they will not lie to you. If you ask them for something, they will give you the answer. Which was, in a way, it was helpful because I'm like, okay, well, I mean, he's a native speaker, so I'm like, okay, well, it doesn't get any better than that. So, but I feel like, like the same kind of thing where it was just like, I don't know. For me, it was more I could speak better than I could listen because especially because I was so used to, like when I first got to Germany, I was so used to speaking with my boyfriend at that time. And it was like, well, okay, well, I know how to speak, but it was just like listening and processing was just so different. And listening comprehension was always my worst skill.
Yeah. Yeah, it can be really tough. My mind starts to wander.
Yeah, I know.
If you miss like a certain part of it and then you're trying to figure out what the audio said or a person said, and then you miss the next part, you're just like totally lost. I'm like, oh no, I'm gone. Like,
yeah. I mean, especially because my first week in Germany, I remember I just had a massive headache because I just spent so much time just getting adjusted to the fact that I'm not in an English speaking world anymore. And they actually had they threw this party that Saturday after I had just gotten there. And there are like all these people, like their family, friends, their kids. And I just got so overwhelmed. I'm like, I don't speak that well. And they're like, you speak very well, so you'll be fine. And I was just like, I need to go to my room and just take a break.
Yeah.
And I remember like calling my mom just so I could remember how to speak English.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like, so for you, like, did you, for the most part, feel a lot of language anxiety in a way? Because I know, like, sometimes, like, it can be like, well, I'm not perfect. And then other times it's like, I'm just still just trying to get information and I'm trying to use whatever I have.
Yeah. The language anxiety is like the perfect way to describe my whole language learning journey. Because I always thought I would get to a point where I would start to feel super confident and I just wouldn't run into that ever anymore. But I still am at the point where I think a few days ago, I told someone, I don't speak very well. Like I don't speak Italian very well. And people are like, what are you talking about? Because I am very much a perfectionist. Like I sometimes will avoid saying things if I don't think that it's right, or I'm unsure about a certain conjugation, or I'm like, is that really how you'd say that? And I get so caught up in that I'm like, better to just not say anything at all, which is not not a good thing to do. But especially as you said, like asking for information or going into a store, living here, having to do things just like appointments. I had to get like a blood test a while ago, doing things that you wouldn't think of, necessarily needing to do in another language. But now if you live in this country, you have to do like eye appointments and doctor appointments, whatever. It can be very nerve-wracking because, maybe I'm in a situation where I'm like, oh, I don't know this vocabulary for this medical term or whatever. But I've found that at least in Italy, usually the people are already very nice and willing to help you. If you're already speaking in Italian, Italians are very complimentary and always are like, oh, you speak so well. You say one sentence and they're like, you're amazing. So usually if they know, okay, this girl's a foreigner, she speaks fairly well. Okay, maybe she doesn't know a few words or she needs some help. Like I've always noticed that they'll try to help me out, which makes me feel good. No one has ever been like, you don't know this word, or like, why don't you know this complex grammar thing? But I think for me, it's still, for some reason, I really have this feeling of like, if something's not perfect, I get really, like anxious to speak because I just don't want to be speaking. I don't want to sound dumb, like in another language. It's something where I tell this to my boyfriend all the time because I have an Italian boyfriend. And I say to him, like, I promise, in English, I'm a lot smarter. Like, I feel like someone who hears me speak Italian probably thinks like, oh, she's dumb, which is not the case, but I think it's just something that I put on myself because I feel like probably the way I'm constructing sentences sounds odd or whatever, but
Yeah.
what I go through.
Was there ever a point where you felt like where you were transitioning from like, like Italian is just some like it's a language I'm learning and I can sort of, like it's new, but then there's a point where it's like it feels like second nature. Do you ever feel like there's like you've kind of reached that point, or do you feel like there's still like more that you want to do or want to learn?
I mean, I've definitely felt that way a little bit. Like, it's interesting because I don't have to try so hard to understand Italian. Like, I do remember, because a lot of people will ask me to send me messages, oh, do you ever get to a point where you stop translating in your head when you're reading or watching a show? Which is something that's very interesting because I always thought, oh, you're probably always translating, to your native language. But I definitely noticed I got to a point where, I can keep up with the speed of a conversation if I'm in a group of Italians or, I'm overhearing some other conversation where I'm not necessarily having to translate it to English in my head. It's just because I've obviously like been exposed to the vocabulary and words so often that now I can understand right away, which is cool. And it's something that like just kind of started happening slowly as I was reading more and watching shows, and you kind of don't realize it's happening. Sometimes if I'm like, I don't know, watching a show or maybe I'm watching YouTube videos and some of the ads are English, some of the ads are in Italian. Sometimes I've thought about it where I heard something and then I was like, wait, was that in English or Italian? Like, how come I just understood that certain thing? Like, was that in English or Italian? Because I'm hearing both so much all the time now because I still talk with family and friends in English, but I still like live my life here in Italian. So they definitely like gotten a lot more connected and I don't have to be actively translating back and forth to each one, which has been interesting. But I definitely have a long way to go. Like there's still certain topics or like, talking about feelings, talking about more complex things when I have to use certain grammar constructions like congiuntivo. That definitely does not come to me very easily. I still have to be like actively thinking about if I say certain words that afterwards need congiuntivo. I'm like still doing the little charts in my head. So there's definitely certain things that I definitely want to get better at, and I think will help me feel more of like, okay, I've reached this level where I can confidently say like I'm at an advanced level.
No. Yeah. I mean, I also want to just kind of know, like, what do you feel like was like your most like in terms of like just not just language, but I know like culture is also part of it. But what do you feel like has been like one of like the most frustrating, but also like really rewarding parts of the whole experience? Because I know like every time you go to a new country, it's like people do things differently, and or like, oh, there's certain like I know like in Germany, like hardly anything's open on Sunday, or they separate their trash and they're very, very like anal about it,
Yeah, same here in Italy. There's like 4 different trash what's the word? 4 different trash like
the receptacles
categories. I don't know. Yeah. So I was like, it was very difficult for me in the beginning. I had no idea because it used to be where like some days, one day out of the week, they collected the plastic and the paper, but then the indifferent and the glass, like that always had a bin out on the street. It was too confusing. But I think also just I remember in the beginning, one thing that was really difficult for me was navigating restaurants, because here in Italy, a lot of times you just choose a table and sit down, especially if you're going to a restaurant that's like outdoors. Sometimes you can kind of like the waiters are either standing at the door, kind of just walking around the table. So you kind of make eye contact with them and you can like point at a table, but most of the time you just sit down. Whereas I feel like in the US, I mean, pretty much any time you walk into a restaurant, like you go to the hostess and you say how many people there are and whatever. I mean, obviously there's still restaurants like that in Italy, but in Bologna, at least, where there are so many outdoor, like casual places, if you want to do just like drinks or whatever before dinner, I remember I always had so much trouble because sometimes I would just be standing there, and sometimes the waiters aren't like they see you, and I'm like, I don't know what to do. And I wasn't super confident in my Italian, so I was like, what's happening? Sometimes you would sit down at the table and they'd be like, no, that's reserved. And I was like, I don't know. I don't know what's happening. I think also just little things like grocery stores. I already knew this from when I studied abroad in Rome, but you like weigh your produce and then you get the little sticker that you put on the bag. That was the last time when I was in Rome. It was very difficult for me. I was like, I don't understand how this works right away. I remember like reading a blog article about buying produce at the grocery store in Italy. So just like little things that in the beginning it might seem really overwhelming, but then after a while, like now even if there's a new situation, an appointment or some like new environment, I mean, I feel a little bit more confident about figuring it out, whatever it may be, just because of my level of Italian. But yeah, it really is interesting because it does feel like when you first get here, every little thing is so different, and it also makes it more tiring because you're already mentally fatigued, and it's just like, why can't anything be simple?
Yeah, I mean, I remember having to learn, like, I think the first few days in Paris, how to order at a cafe, because it's like you specifically have to go in, you order, but then you have to wait for them to make it, and then you go to the table. And I remember I was like, I basically ordered like a tea, and I sat down, and then this guy, it was a very nice man, and he said, just in English, he doesn't serve, so you have to wait for him to make it and then take it. And I was like, oh, thank you. At least like someone will tell me. But after that, I was like terrified to order. And then also it's like a separate price if you sit down versus taking something away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So fun stuff. But and I remember having to learn like, especially that when they say like having something to go, and I remember because I did some research beforehand because I wanted to make sure I didn't look like a complete ignorant American, but I was just like, okay, so apparently like when they say like place or emporter, so like if you're here to go, but when you say to go, it means they're going to package it in a way because they assume you're going to go somewhere else and sit down and eat it, versus like how we have like Starbucks cups where we just drink on the go, and that's not a thing. Yeah. So I don't know. There's just some things you just learn the hard way. You can only research so much about culture, and then it's a whole other thing when you go and actually experience it.
I know. Oh yeah. I mean, anyone who thinks that they're going to move to a new country and won't have any embarrassing moments, sorry, I hate to break it to you, but it's going to happen. Like, I've been embarrassed so many times, and then I'm like, I can never come back here again. Like, I have to choose a new place or whatever.
Yeah. So I don't know. And I remember like trying to buy a external hard drive because I lost my old one, and I was like, I'm just gonna get one. And I was like, I hope I will find this thing before someone tries to like help me, because I was like, it was like my second or third day there, and I'm like, please nobody help me, because that means I'm gonna have to use my broken German, because I had just like, when you first get there, it's like I'm just transitioning into using this language that I've used to learning. Now I use it all the time. And I'm like, please don't help me. I'm not acculturated yet.
Yeah. No, I know that exact feeling. I'm like, yeah, please don't talk to me. Because then if like, do you need any help? I'm like, no, like, because I have no idea how to say what I am looking for.
So just kind of like my final question is like, what kind of preparation should someone do before their move? Like also like from like kind of like in terms of like preparation, in terms of like financially, like even like for you, like how did you plan for this in terms of, because I know moving can be expensive, and also trying to figure out what happens to all your stuff and whatnot. So yeah, I
mean, I would say if you really want to do a move, like it's not just going to a program for a few months, which is still a great experience. People are always like, oh, is it still worth it to do for a few months? Yeah, definitely. But this is more geared towards if you actually want to move to another country. It takes a lot of planning. And I think a lot of people get this idea in their head thinking like, oh, this would be so cool. I think I can, figure this out in a few months. No, like I knew I wanted to go back to Italy, like I said, after I got back from Rome. So that was literally like 4 or 5 years, from leaving Rome to going to Bologna. There was like a span of 4 or 5 years. I initially wanted to go a little bit sooner, but COVID happened, which in a way was good in the sense that it gave me more time to save up money because, as you said, it is very expensive. And I definitely would say it's good to have, emergency funds, but also like not rely on, oh, I can just get a job there, or you never know what kind of situation you're getting into. So definitely make sure you have plenty of backup funds, or at least like I had a remote job, which is also very good to at least have some sort of plan financially. Also for your visa, you probably will be required to show some sort of level of finances anyway. So you have to check on that. What I did is I'm a very organized person. I had like so many different Excel spreadsheets of the things I needed to do, but also timelines of like, okay, 6 months out, 5 months out, 3 months out, because I had to do things like sell my car, sell my apartment. I mean, I really got rid of all my stuff, basically. I mean, I had 2 bins at a friend's house in LA that I just recently brought to my parents' house. But that's like the only stuff that I have, because I really did try to sell everything, make sure that I had everything figured out, like doctor's appointments done, tying up any sort of loose ends, like at work or any other things. Like you really have to go through and think about, okay, what are all the little things I need to do before I leave? I think it's really important to be organized. Also, things like your visa, expect for things to take a long time. Even just making your appointment at a consulate for a visa, sometimes appointments are booked months and months out. So it's really not something that you can just decide you want to do and, oh, in a few months you'll be there. Like I would give myself a while. I mean, I think it was good, honestly, that I took a few years to get this idea in my head to make sure, decide where I wanted to go. Even just deciding on Bologna took a long time because I really wanted to be sure, obviously, the place I was going to move to, that I would like it. I think if anything, take more time than you need. But I think you also need to do some mental preparation, because if you haven't lived anywhere else before, it's going to be very difficult. And I don't say that to scare anyone. I like obviously encourage everyone to have an experience like this, but it will be very difficult, especially if you have to go through, getting a permit while you are there. In Italy, it's always a nightmare trying to deal with any sort of bureaucracy, but you really just have to stay determined, and you have to kind of expect that, yeah, there's going to be some times where, maybe you want to give up. Maybe you're like, oh my God, did I make the wrong choice? But I think in the end, like the growth and the experience that you have, even the good ones or the bad ones, like it really, you grow so much more than you think. I mean, because you're learning a new language, potentially, but also just like being in a new culture, meeting so many new people. It's really worth it in the end, even though, it'll be difficult. I think people think, oh, I go to Italy and it'll be like the dolce vita all the time. Everything will be perfect. Not necessarily. I think come, experience it for yourself, but also know that just like if you were to stay at home, not every day will be perfect, but it probably will be worth it in the end, even on the tough days.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time, being here and sharing your knowledge and your experience. I'm hoping it will inspire whoever is listening, especially because, as you can see, it is possible to do these things. It's just that, we have to be more strategic about it and kind of like, just seeing like, the aspects of what we need to go through in order to make that happen. So where can we find you on either on social media or whatnot?
Yeah, so I have Instagram and TikTok at Shay. And then my YouTube channel is my biggest platform, and I'm trying to post more regularly on there. That one is just Shea Jordan. And those are the main socials that I have currently.
Okay. Again, thank you for your time, and all right. Bye.
Well, thank you.